the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Guerrilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today we're with John Daniel Trask from Raygun. Welcome along, JD.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here in Auckland. You're based in Wellington, so very nice you're able to be in town and to give us some time.
Beautiful day,
It is nice out there. Now, we haven't really talked much about Raygun in the past, yet you're a real success story within the New Zealand technology and startup world. So I'm kind of really excited to sit down and have this chat and to really learn about your story. Before we jump in, of course, a big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark HP, and Guerrilla Technology. Where should we start? Maybe, just sort of a bit of background in terms of, did you grow up in Wellington? What's, and how did you get into this big wide world of tech?
Yeah, no, I actually was born outside of Palmerston North and grew up there until I moved to Wellington the day before I started at a company called Intergen down there in their grad developer program. But I started programming when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I like to say to people, it always makes you sound like you were some really clever kid. And it was like, no, I just, lived quite far from Palmerston North really and had nothing else to do. And we bought a computer. And so I learned a little bit of BASIC and I fell in love at that point. I always described it as feeling like programming was like discovering a box of Lego with an infinite number of pieces, where the only limitation was my ability to think of how to solve a problem. If it seemed impossible, just wasn't thinking hard enough.
Love it.
And so I really fell in love with that. I love the builder mentality, the creating of things. And so I pretty quickly decided that I wanted to build software businesses when I was growing up. I still one day I'll be a grown up.
Cool. Just before we dive into that, there'll be some people are curious and wondering what was that first computer you had? What was your first technology?
Yeah, so it was a 486 SX25 with 8 megabytes of RAM and a 213 megabyte hard drive. And we did have a CD-ROM drive, which was a 2-speed at the time. It was a Philips branded one, and I think it cost $2,000 as part of the cost of the overall computer.
Wow.
Unfortunately, my father has always had this view that I think I've got from him that is basically always adopt new technology. He kind of said to me at one point years ago, he said, is when you stop learning stuff, that's when it's kind of all over, and so even though he's quite old now, if he's watching this, he'll be annoyed I said that, but at the same time, he's still learning, it's still try new things. So we got this computer and it was a great advancement to be able to play with it. I did have access to an Apple IIe at intermediate, so a 486 SX25 was like God mode computer compared to that thing. It was really cool.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
And it also sets the scene for, for those of us that are a little bit older in terms of, what era you were, you were getting involved in technology.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of people where it's like a 486, I bought this book actually a while ago. It's called the Computer Graphics Black Book, and it was written by this guy that worked at id Software around the time that they were building Quake in the 90s, and it goes into different assembly code and optimizing for graphics. And my favorite part of the book is you open it up at the introduction and it says, well, in the age of high-performance 486s and Pentiums, is performance optimization even still necessary? And you're like, whoa,
boy, is it decades later, and it's still a challenge.
Absolutely, isn't it? Yeah. So I fell in love at that age. I'll speed it up a little bit, but sold a bit of commercial software through high school. Built a PC repair company as well as an online retailer through university. And then applied for one job, which was at Intergen. And I thought, if Intergen hires me, I'll go and learn what a real company does. And if they don't, I'm just going to build up these businesses that I'd sort of started building already. Very, very fortunately, they hired me. And, one of the small things, when I was doing the PC repair thing, I think I was charging $35 an hour to drive around, the Manawatu fixing people's computers.
Yeah.
And, I went there and I was like, wait, you're billing me out at $150 an hour? It was like, oh, okay. I have a child's understanding of value here.
Yes.
Learned a lot. And, very fortunately, bunch of great personalities in that business. One of them in particular stood out, which was Wayne Forgerson, who was one of the directors of the company. And I also met a person, Jeremy Boyd, or JB, and obviously him and I started our early business Mindscape together. But Wayne really worked quite closely with me, even though I was a grad, and sort of I worked on a lot of projects with him. And I don't know if he realized quite how much I was sort of mentoring about the bigger picture of business and how we think about customers and how do we do sales and delivery and all of that. So I learned a lot there in that time. So I worked there for about 3 years. I always wanted to build a business though, and I never shied away from telling them this.
Yes.
I think it probably worked because effectively the 3 founding sort of members were still in the business. And I think, founder to founder, you're like, yeah, I kind of get that bug,
Yeah.
And so I left in 2007 to start Mindscape with Jeremy. And that was, what's that, 17 odd years ago now? So it's been a while.
Yeah.
So we built a range of different companies, different startups, various different things. Yeah.
Yep. And so what were those initial things that you built before you got onto Raygun?
So we actually built, I think, 11 products before we built the Raygun product, and we bootstrapped the business initially. So there was actually a third founder as well, Andrew. He didn't last, I don't think, more than a year. So we put in 10K each, with the agreement that we were also going to bring in our own laptops. So we weren't going to buy any hardware with that seed capital. We rented the cheapest office we could find, which was $500 a month, and it was above a drug and alcohol rehab clinic. I realize listeners can't see the size of this room, but this is about twice the size of the office space. And we were super frugal. But what really helped us out was we were reasonably well known in the New Zealand market for being very capable engineers.
Yes.
And in particular, Jeremy, who's a little bit older than me, really established quite the reputation, particularly in the Microsoft community. And so, huge shout out to a range of people at Microsoft New Zealand, like Sean Rain and Nigel Parker and Daryl Burling. They all helped us, where on day one of starting the company, we got a $250,000 contract from Microsoft New Zealand to build a web app that would be used as demoware for developers around the world to understand how to build high-performance web applications and scale them. And so that was a huge benefit to us, really, in the starting capital. But that all came down to that relationship that had been built there prior, like I say, particularly between Jeremy and the folks at Microsoft. He'd helped them get with the engagement around user groups and all of that. You probably remember that time where it was really rich time in the tech sector. And so that helped us a bunch. Then we started building our own products, and those were things that were very nerdy. They were like data access products. Our first one was called Lightspeed. And in the interest of a story here, we built this thing, and it was an object relational mapper for .NET. There wasn't really any out there. There was a couple of open source ones. And then Microsoft built some entity framework and linked to SQL. And then as a little bit of extra kind of salt in the wound, I mentioned Andrew earlier. Andrew had gone to work at Microsoft on their object relational mapper technologies. So he was now, in effect, in competition with us. And the positive thing is that Microsoft then proceeded to kill one of their object relational mappers, which was linked to SQL, which in my opinion was the good one. They kept Entity Framework, which was a dog, to the point where I used to joke that maybe Andrew was our Trojan horse. But what helped there was actually that Microsoft worldwide educated the .NET market on object relational mappers, and so that's one of the things I say to people, like, a giant company coming into your patch may seem threatening, and it absolutely can be, But if they're going to educate the entire market on the value of what you're doing, that is actually can have a lot of side benefits. And so what happened is a lot of people started building on things like EF, Entity Framework, and then they'd realize that the performance sucked. And so they'd go looking for something that would make it better. And we were selling a product that was largely compatible, or at least small amount of work to shift over, but performed super well.
Great.
And so that really helped us. We then proceeded to build a range of other things. We even built stuff for Windows Phone. We've definitely had some failures in that set, but we had a range of products that we were selling. We also did joint ventures where we would do a discount development rate, but take equity in the company that was working with us. Okay. And the most famous one of that in New Zealand is givealittle.co.nz. So we built that. And Natalie Whitaker was the CEO of that business. And that was sold to Spark in 2012. I'm still really proud of the fact that business has generated hundreds of millions of dollars of philanthropy to needy Kiwi causes.
Yes,
so really awesome to be involved in that.
Yeah.
We also built a range of other companies across business valuation, email mining, and a few things. To be very clear, some of these things were, sold for a sandwich. They weren't all spectacular successes. And then in 2012, I think it was, we got a little bit of co-funding from Callaghan around a project grant to build something new. And I decided with Jeremy that we would build a error reporting product. So for those of you who aren't familiar, left it pretty late in the piece here to say, what is Raygun?
Yeah.
You can think of it as the black box flight recorder for your software. So when stuff breaks, it's going to provide enough context and information back to the developers that they can fix it quickly. Okay. And when I joined Intergen, one of the things that stood out to me from Jeremy Boyd was that he was obviously a phenomenal engineer. And I was I had all the arrogance of a kid who'd been coding for 10 years at this point. I'm like, how am I not the best person here at this? This guy's awesome. I got to beat him, And so I wanted to learn all the lessons. And one of the things that I noticed was that he would always set up his code to send him an email if there was an unhandled fault. And this was back in 2004. And there were all sorts of problems with this because this was when you had like 10 megabyte inboxes, and an error in a loop could saturate your whole inbox in like 3 seconds. There was no workflow tools, no sharing, no anything. And so we decided we'd build this product that effectively created that same sort of environment, but gave workflow tools, team management, centralized view, all of that sort of stuff. And so we launched that in early 2013 under the name of Raygun. At the time, it was a product of Mindscape. It was just one in the box. It was our first SaaS product though. So I love not starting the month at $0. So up until this point, every single month would start and you'd be like, boy, I hope some people come and buy Lightspeed off us this month or our WPF tools. But starting the month and going, okay, well, revenue's going to be at this level and hopefully we can add more was a much, much more enjoyable way to run a business.
Yeah, it can be quite transformational.
Yeah, I mean, going back to that point of being 17, 18 years now, I think I'd be bald if I hadn't had the the recurring revenue at some point. Yeah. And that product for that first year, we didn't really do a whole lot with it. It was in market, it was there. And then we started getting a lot more organic interest, including takeover offers for the company that obviously ultimately we didn't do. But that was what really caused Jeremy and I to think, like, there's something quite different with this. We weren't getting phone calls from the types of people we were on data access technologies. And so we kind of took it from there. Raygun now is actually its own sort of stable of products around the idea of effectively its customer experience through the dev team. So any errors, what's the performance, their load time, that sort of stuff. And where is that load time going so that you can try and improve it?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So obviously in those early days, I'm picking there wasn't really a whole lot out there in terms of other people trying to do the same sort of thing that you were doing. But as time goes on, it tends to be if you've got something that's a bit of a winner, more more people come into the space, and we'll be crossing swords with you in one way or another.
Yep.
How have you dealt with that? What's that kind of look like over the years?
Well, a big part for us has been how to diversify the overall offering. So without naming names across the broader category, we've had a couple of offers to acquire the company so that we would go in and run the combined entity of maybe bolting on a competitor in crash reporting. And the conversations that I've had with some of the owners of those businesses, whether they were founding set or maybe PE or whatnot at that point, has generally been that it was a mistake to not broaden out of a singular category. And I think what we've seen a little bit of this more recently in the current economic environment around people wanting to consolidate vendors. Go to the vendor that will sell you 10 things rather than having 10 vendors selling you one thing.
Yeah.
And I would say Raygun's probably in the middle of that transformation at the moment, in that we have 3 products. But if you go and look at some of the major players out there, like a New Relic or a Datadog, they have like 25 products. And so we're looking at ways that we might expand or broaden and add more complements to the set, because the more you can bring that data together, the more holistic the picture becomes.
Yeah.
So we look at it in that sense. The other area that's quite a differentiator for Raygun versus almost every competitor is we're not heavily VC backed. So we are not sitting here going, gosh, I hope the investors write us another check this year so that we can keep operating. No, we operate as a proper business, and we make money, and we reinvest that money. So what I've seen, for example, you'll know this as well as anybody, but you've got a lot of companies that raise a lot of money in, say, 2021 that are now finding out they're not worth a fraction of what they raised at last time, and they're in a bad place. You've got the companies that exploded with COVID growth, and that growth disappeared. Now, that's just a fact of life. But, if you had massively amplified the value of your company during that time with investors, now you've got a big problem on your hands.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of issues that are going on out there where I've found that just building a sustainable business has probably been the right move, because we've seen a handful of competitors kind of turn up, get quickly acquired, disappear, and never get spoken of again. And there's good on them. I'm never going to begrudge a person having an exit and getting their payday. But one of the realizations I've had in recent years is it's like, okay, well, if you sold the company, you get the money, you spend 6 months or so chilling out, you work out you need the capital to do some work for you, so you invest it to get a return. Then you decide you're still bored, so you want something to do. Then you realize you're totally unemployable, so you need to kind of have your own thing.
Yes.
So you start this new thing where you buy something, and now you're operating a business again. I was like, well, wouldn't it just be better to just keep operating businesses and skip this malarkey in the middle? Anyway, that's kind of where we've ended up. But we still get opportunities, but it really just comes down to if the timing would be right and the right outcome there for where it would go. Because, as I say, quite honestly, a lot of the time things get acquired, they just disappear. I'm never happy when we're using a product and they send you the announcement that they've been acquired.
Yeah, it's often not a good sign. But there are always exceptions to the rule.
Yep.
So over that time, started out 2 or 3 people in a in a small space.
Yep.
What do you look? What does the business look like now? Where are your customers, and what's the whole sort of the makeup look like?
Yep. Well, you'll be pleased to know we're no longer above the drug and alcohol rehab clinic. No, so we're a little bit more distributed. We were more distributed pre-COVID. So company headcount, including contractors, typically bounces between sort of 40 to 50 people. We've got my co-founder and COO. She's in North Carolina. She's been out there this year. She moved back over there because we did consolidate back to New Zealand quite heavily through COVID times. We've got a person in Taiwan, UK, a little bit out there, and we're just really going back out there again. We're still very heavily based in Wellington at the moment, but our customer base is very global. So we have it's increased since this, but it's about 50% of our customers in the US, about 30% across Europe. I think it's 8% in New Zealand, and that's a bit of an outlier, in there. But it's a very diversified customer base. And that has also been an element of adding resilience to our business. So, for example, when COVID hit, we certainly saw some customers get really hurt by COVID. They might have been the tourism or airline operators, those folks. And then we saw other customers that were, say, in streaming or gaming absolutely explode. And so that horizontal nature of our customer base and the fact that it's quite broad is actually a strength to the business.
And how many customers do you have, or what other kind of things can you share? And I know that
paint a bit more of a picture.
You probably can't tell us everything if I were to ask you, your recurring revenue numbers and all that sort of stuff. That's not necessarily something you can talk to, but I'm sure there's always a little bit more you can share. So
no. Well, the big one for us is normally people are surprised on the data volumes that we process. So I'd be, unless it's maybe like the digital assets that maybe Weta works on, I would be probably fairly surprised if there's Kiwi companies necessarily dealing with the volumes that we process through our platform. And so in terms of customers, there's thousands of organizations using the products across, probably about 150,000 engineers across those accounts. And we have a model which is very much self-serve, meaning customers come, they try the product. If it doesn't suck, they give us a credit card, and then they pay. We've experimented a few times with trying to build out sales teams. It didn't not work, but it hasn't worked well enough to make it worthwhile. And the go-to-market to the engineering teams doesn't really work so well with it for our business. And so we are quite incentivized to ensure that the product experience is good enough to make sure people will convert. And so one metric is that 1 in 5 people who send data to Raygun will become a paying customer. And so we're pretty proud of that it must provide some value. And then in terms of the larger customers, I'll start with a known brand, but like Domino's Pizza. Globally, they run their online ordering platform, uses Raygun for any fault reporting. And what's really cool about organizations like that is that we work quite closely with them to identify new ways to improve the customer experience. Like I say, interesting enough, while some people see us as an engineering tool or a technology tool, it really is about building better customer experiences. And so I love working with Domino's on some of their ideas of how to take, say, a fault in an online order, but leverage Raygun to perhaps contact the store that was going to deliver the pizza. And if something went wrong, let the store contact the individual. And that's that sort of higher level thinking that I admire in them. But then through to our largest sort of experience was both with crash reporting, but we have our real user monitoring or RUM product. And what that does is that measures the user's actual load time experience, how long did things take? And one of our customers is HBO. And so for the finale of Game of Thrones, we peaked at tracking 87 million concurrent viewers of that show concurrently, right? All going through our platform. We didn't lose a single piece of data. And keep in mind, that's not errors. That's like sending data every few seconds about what's loading, how's the buffering going, and all of that sort of stuff. And so while our pricing and the positioning is all like, hey, you can come on and even as a hobby developer if you wanted, the technology behind the scenes can scale to the largest organizations on earth. And so that's something that's really important about Raygun is, talking about headcount. I'm a huge believer that product companies, unless it's in your actual sales function, should not be scaling on headcount the way most of us in the industry do. I want to kind of keep the headcount relatively capped. I want us to scale on the impact of the individuals that work in the business and the impact of the software. And so I'm probably giving this away since we're about to bring in a handful of interns through the summer, but one of my party tricks is usually to get one of the engineers to work in their internship on what we call our Raygun for JS file, which is our JavaScript SDK. And they always jump in and they'll add a feature or look and fix a bug, deploy it, cool. And you kind of go and casually say, did you know that that file gets loaded 1.2 billion times every month onto people's machines? And they're like, what? And it's like, this might be one of the earliest things they've done. Obviously, we have quality control checks in the process.
Yeah.
But that idea that you don't come to Raygun to ship stuff that no one's ever going to use. We want to optimize for the people that want to have that sort of level of impact and control in the world.
That's cool. And so how do you find the right sort of people to join your team so you can have this, this tight team that's, delivering a great result for Raygun and for your clients?
Yep. Well, a big part of that is highlighting the nature of the work. The work we do here is quite unique. So, for example, we recently, last year actually, we hired the deputy head of the School of Engineering from Waikato University. This is a person with patents in the category of, garbage collection within the JVM. They've done stuff with IBM. These are quite specialized and deep skills. And the more people like that we bring into our business, the more it attracts other high performers, which is the other side of the coin, which, we chatted about earlier, which is I also like to try and alienate the people that I don't want to work at Raygun by using Twitter. I'll put my opinions out there and people sometimes get really mad and I'm like, great, I don't want you to come and work at Raygun. I want the people that want to work with other high performers and really, really want to create those outsized outcomes. And unfortunately, some people think that means, hours, and hours is not impact in a product business. That's really antiquated thinking. It's about getting the smartest people, the ones that are going to think a whole lot about the problems they're solving and be really passionate about those problems.
Yep.
Gets in there. And so that's important. Similarly, as a bit of a story, back years ago, we've been a very, very long-term supporter of the Summer of Tech program. And I went along to this talk. It was the speed dating night where businesses could get up and do a quick chat.
Yep.
And I listened to one company got up and said, hey, come and work at XYZ. We have pool table and, we do all this sort of stuff. And then the next one sort of got up and said, hey, well, we have a disco ball in our office, and all this. And the next one was like, we have a slide, and I was fortunately the last speaker, and I just got up and I said, we don't have a slide. We don't have a disco ball. We don't have a foosball table. But what we have is really hard scaling problems to come and solve. And I'll never forget the student that came up to us afterwards. He said, I really appreciated you saying that. He said, I've never understood why all these companies think we went to university to get a degree in computer science to come and play foosball or go on a slide.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't get it. It's like, if the company is not actually selling you on the work, you should be asking yourself why they're not selling you on the work. It's probably pretty boring and uninteresting, so they're trying to distract you with a slide.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And for those that are on Twitter or x.com as it is now, and they're curious about your tweets or posts. Was it Trask JD? Is that your
Trask JD?
Yeah. So feel free to have a little bit of a look and a follow if you happen to like what JD's talking about. Now, there's always the big challenges in any business, especially with a startup where you're starting out with, usually limited funds, which, as you mentioned, you bootstrapped, you basically funded things yourselves. You had to earn every dollar to be able to grow and scale and so on. Other than you've had some investment along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, maybe we can just drill into that a little bit in terms of, when did you bring, a little bit of external investment on, and what did that look like? And, why have you stopped in terms of, needing to get further investment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we didn't raise any capital until 2014. So going back to that Raygun story, we built it in 2012. We launched in 2013. Late 2013, we start getting acquisition offers. straight up, obviously, we weren't making that much revenue off this product yet. And that was a reason we didn't do any transaction, was to sort of acknowledge, this, unless your multiple is ridiculous, we're not going to be selling for the price of a pizza. And so acknowledging that we felt, look, there's something kind of a bit unique here. We went out and we raised some capital. Some people would call it a friends and family round, but what was interesting to me was that because we'd built these joint ventures earlier on, it wasn't like friends and family, like I rang up my uncle. It was actually people that we had built some of those businesses with previously, who we had been engaged with, and they came in with us. And it was this awesome opportunity to kind of just go the other way. And what's really cool about that is that a lot of them are also business operators as well. And so I'm not necessarily having to manage investors who are looking for the payday tomorrow. Obviously, we all want a payday. That's the point of it. But they're very understanding of the challenges of business. And so we went out, we did this raise. We raised, I think it was 1.3 million Kiwi at the time. We valued the business as you have to. But we largely cautioned on one point, which was all of the other stuff we'd done pre-Raygun, even though it's revenue generating, we're going to value that at zero. The reason we valued that at zero was because we were planning to be all in on Raygun. And even though there was years of generating revenue off those older products, we decided to sunset those brands and those things in there. Out of that funding round, I can't quite remember if this... is exactly how it landed, but the first sort of equal largest investors in that round was Punakaiki in round one, Punakaiki Fund, and my wife and I set up a holding company to invest in our own round. And I sometimes get that comment from people, they're like, how do you avoid dilution? I'm like, well, it helps if you invest in your own rounds. That's one way to do it. And so that helped. And then we did a top-up sort of round in 2016, from the majority being the same investors that came in 2014.
Yep.
But we've that top-up round, I think, brought us to, it was about another $1 million. We were doing an expansion into the United States at the time. And so we were already selling well into the United States, but we wanted to go and invest in putting boots on the ground and seeing how that would go. So we did that. But generally speaking, we reinvest any sort of free cash flow back into the growth of the company overall. So that's been another way that we've avoided it. But that's led to about 85%, maybe a little bit more, of the company being held by insiders within it still today.
Yep. Oh, that's a good position to be in.
Well, one of the reasons I say we haven't, diluted down more is that I don't think I'm very good at capital raising. So I've had the unfortunate side effect is I have to own a lot of the business. But it's a good side effect if you can get there. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I would challenge, just I guess to some listeners, is I worry that until a couple of years ago, just about everybody thought, you go and raise money to build a software company. The reality is, building software is an extremely low capital cost endeavor at the very beginning, where ideally you go and put that time in yourself. Paying for software developers is eye-wateringly expensive, right? And that's something I've never quite really understood, is why we don't see more people taking earlier stage things where they have the skills to build further before they, when somebody comes and tries to pitch me, and I have invested in a range of companies, but I'm not going to invest in something that literally hasn't even started to be built yet. If we really are at the idea stage, there's nothing to show. And I think, the barriers have never been lower. If we briefly chat about ChatGPT, I find this fascinating because my wife said to me one day, she's like, why don't you build this thing? I was like, why don't you build it? It's like, you just ask ChatGPT how to do it now. Because one of the things when we had our AI week at Raygun, we got everybody in the company to do our software development test. And so suddenly when you have the designers and the customer success folks and the finance people saying, hang on, I can do Raygun's coding test, and I'm not a coder. Like, the barriers to actually doing things have largely dissolved here. And that's one of the things I just challenge anybody who starts thinking, I have to go raise some money. I have to dilute the thing before I've really done anything. I'm like, no, you want to take it as not as far as possible because you may miss opportunity, but you can take it a lot further before you start talking about whether it's even investment grade business. It simply might not be.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack, and we can delve into there. But you did just talk about generative AI.
Yeah.
It plays a role, obviously, right across probably every sector. But from a software perspective, what's your viewpoint on how useful it is today, and how you expect that to change over the years ahead?
Yeah, well, today I sort of describe it as an Iron Man suit. So it's about empowering an individual to create more than if they were without it. But it's not currently really being used to be a force multiplier for a group. We're not crossing boundaries yet. There's obviously issues around, hallucination. These things aren't quite right, blah, blah, blah. I would paint myself in the extremely bullish corner of AI, and not wanting to cast aspersions here, but I feel like you and I were both around for the internet arriving, and I see a lot of people making analogies to the iPhone, and I think that's the wrong analogy to make. I make it more back to the internet's arrival, and I think AI technologies are going to be far more impactful, although I think they needed the internet to be really useful.
Yes.
But I've had some people sort of say, oh, the grift has just moved from cryptocurrency to AI. And I'm like, no, I disagree with that. And part of the reason I disagree with that is because, when it was sort of 1996 and we were using the internet, and your JPEG was downloading like this rate, it took you like 2 minutes of a squealing modem to connect. You couldn't use your phone if you were on the internet, all of these limitations.
The pixels flashing up in front of you.
But even normal people were willing to go through that pain because it was so impactful. Contrast and compare that to, say, crypto. They weren't. Only the people who were more or less on the grift or very technically capable, were doing anything with it. It wasn't approachable. The juice was not worth the squeeze, fundamentally. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is AI is sort of in the same camp as the internet, where it's like, yeah, it's not perfect. And yeah, it's kind of expensive. And and all these things, but we're all going to use it because we can see that potential in there. And I'm really excited about where this can go, because I think people sometimes are a little over-indexing on breakthrough technology outcomes versus taking what we already have and just marginally improving it. And what I mean by that is, take hallucinations. You could absolutely say our job is to go and figure out a way to ensure no hallucinations ever occur. Or you could run the same question through the AI like 10 times with different temperature values, and then give it back to the AI and get it to rank them, and basically start building in these error correction sort of cycles within the current domain. And I think that's entirely possible. The biggest challenge at the moment, though, is the rate of improvement that's occurring. And so you learn one thing today, and 3 days later, somebody's got a better version of it. And so that's proving, I think, to be the biggest challenge at the moment, is the goalposts are moving so quickly. It's a super exciting time. There's so much opportunity here. I'm more excited about the broader impacts around sort of operationalizing and improving things across teams and across groups, rather than just the purely singular, hey, it helped me do this. And I think that's going to be the transformational stage. And I think a lot of people are heads down at the moment building that. We're not seeing a lot of it yet. I had somebody make the analogy to me the other day. Remember when the App Store launched on the iPhone? We had all these gimmicky little apps, and they were like the fart app, tap the button, my phone farts, and you have a giggle.
Couldn't do that yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like we're kind of in that phase of AI right now. Like, people are building lots of stuff on top of these open AI stuff, but a lot of them are quite gimmicky. But I'm talking to a lot of founders who are building other companies that are like, hey, I'm automating sales team coaching, hey, I'm building these sorts of things. I think those technologies are going to be coming to market a bit more around the end of the year and early 2024. And I think that's going to be the real start of kind of going, hey, this really changes how we build our businesses. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it'll be really exciting to see what things do come through and how they apply in a range of different areas, and how much of that's coming out of New Zealand, of course, is always of interest.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have some really cool companies here. Like, one of the things I found really quite surprising when I started on my product company journey was just how many amazing product companies there are here, but it makes almost no sense for any of them to market here. So you don't even know they're here. There's a company, Maxava, right? They are quite dominant in the field of disaster recovery for IBMI servers.
That's right. Yeah.
They're based in Wellington. I'd never heard of them.
And
back
Auckland, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I was like, this is not a name that I would hear most Kiwis even know that there was a Kiwi company doing so well. And like, I think, I don't know if it's private, but like some of the world's major companies are relying on this company if disaster strikes their business. That's cool. I love that. And I think we need to get more of that into New Zealand, just being like, let's be proud and build.
I agree. That's good. So talking about the tough times, what stories can you share from the trenches, JG?
I was about to say, if it can happen, I've seen it, but I realize that's jinxing myself for the rest of today. We've touched a bit on like having a co-founder leave. That was Andrew at the start. Jeremy had to leave the business last year for health reasons. That was quite sudden and a pretty big deal. We've had, challenges like everybody with some staff at times. We've had the person that builds an entire company while pretending to work for you, sort of things, that sort of stuff. You see everything. I mean, that's, at the risk of causing controversy here, this goes back to those Twitter comments that we were talking about. It's like, you can tell the people that have never really been responsible for a lot of people because they have no idea. And it's not that people are necessarily inherently bad, as much as actually keeping everybody aligned is a really, really hard job to do. And so that's usually my day-to-day more stuff, is like, how do I ensure, things are going well? I'm just trying to think of like I'll give you one example, just like a headache. So we moved to Seattle, we lived there for 3 years building out the team up there. And got EY to do my personal taxes. Your taxes are complicated when you're in the US and New Zealand. Yeah. And we get this phone call on like the weekend up there, and they're like, "Oh, hey, we realize we've made a mistake with your taxes." And I'm like, "Well, that's not what I want to hear." And it's like, "Yeah, we didn't realize you owned a business." And I was like, "Well, you literally only know me because you do my businesses, financials here." And like, "Oh, the American team didn't know." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. So what's the deal?" And they're like, "Well, we have this problem that we always extend the filing date to the last day possible. And we're now the day before the last day possible." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "Yeah. And America has this thing that if you own more than 10% of a business, you have to file the full company reports, P&L, balance sheet, like the whole banana, change to US GAAP accounting format and set to a financial year that matches the standard US one, which is 1 January to 31 December, which is not the New Zealand one. And you have to do that for every entity that you own more than 10% of which I owned 8. And I'm like, "So this is like due tomorrow." You've done none of them. Didn't know about it. Like, that's the sort of stuff where you just kind of go, "Oh, okay." And so that's where I think resilience is just so important in being a business leader. And so, I have sat there and give you one example there, but things come up all the time. And I remember talking briefly to a friend of mine. She runs a business in Wellington, and she was having a hard time. And I said, "Look, the best analogy I can give for how I talk to myself when I'm going through times like that is, if you've seen the any of the Marvel movies with Captain America, right? And he's got, blood coming out of his mouth, his eyes on it, and he gets back up and he's like, I could do this all day. It's like, that's kind of the mentality you have to have, because no one else is going to keep getting up, and so you just got to keep going. Okay, you do have to shift your mindset to every problem is not, fatal. What am I going to do here? And I'm going to be honest, it's a huge part of working on yourself. It's not letting that stuff get to you. And a friend of mine, last year was quite a challenging year. That was with Jeremy needing to leave. We still get on great, by the way, and he's doing well, so that's fantastic. But a mutual friend of mine is Josh Robb, and he said to me, he's like, "Oh, I'm really worried. Like, how are you kind of getting on with these things?" And I said, like, honestly, that is hard. But there is a part of me, and this is the little voice in the back of my mind, just says, you're going to win eventually. Just keep going. And I think that is just such an important thing to sort of ingrain in oneself, is this belief, the drive. Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't operate and lead a business without, having that sort of, toughness to go on. How do you get on with helping your team? Because we've seen all sorts of ups and downs, and with COVID and economy and individually across a team, you're going to have people dealing with all sorts of things in their personal lives and health and so on. What do you do to sort of encourage your team to be resilient, and how do you work through those sorts of things? Any particular tips you can share?
Yeah. Well, firstly, like, the people side of business is the hard part of business. And that's not to say people are hard. It's just, as you say, there's so much diversity in what's going on in people's lives and how they're feeling and all of that sort of stuff. So to give an example, when COVID hit, firstly, Raygun did not qualify for the government assistance payment there, so we never drew on that. But I cut the work day by 2 hours for everybody in the company, so effectively made it a 6-hour day. We did not adjust salaries at all through that time. Raygun actually has phenomenally good diversity stats. So every single team except for engineering has more women than men. There's a lot of people with children there. We have a very family friendly environment. There's plenty of Lego in the office. We encourage people to say, bring your kids in,
That's cool.
End of the day, that sort of stuff. And so we looked after our people that way. And that included, making sure that I have a young son. He's 4.5 now, but he just turned 1 when COVID hit, and it was, hey, I'm going to be doing the normal meetings with my son sitting on my knee. I actually think that was one of the real highlights. Obviously COVID overall sucked, but one thing was, there's all that talk of bring your whole self to work, and I always love the joke where it's like, not that part of it, but more to the point was, it's like children as an example. It's like, that is part of your life. It's obviously the most important part of your life, and the idea that you try to hide that from work, to me, seems really odd. Bringing all of your life problems to work, please don't do that. But children, all that sort of stuff, that's a very real sort of, that's just part of the person. That is the package you get. And so that's something I've always been proud of at Raygun, even well before I had my own child, was to be supportive of families. That goes back to that point earlier as well, where it's like, I think some people think that everything is about the hours, and it's not. It's often about the flexibility and the ability to work. I did bring the engineering team back into the office 5 days a week 2 months ago now, I think, maybe 3. And that's worked really, really well.
What sort of pushback did you get with that? Because we follow the story sort of globally around people getting pulled back to the office, and some people say, no, I'm tapping out if I have to be full time back in the office. But what sort of pushback did you get?
There was some folks that weren't, super excited about this idea, but I would say 80% of people were actually quite happy with this decision.
Mm.
I would hope that it doesn't directly lead to anybody leaving, but at the same time, I wasn't comfortable enduring the costs of working remotely, full time at least. So examples of that are there was a very noticeable drop in knowledge sharing.
Mm.
There's not just the learn through osmosis of hearing people having conversations. Now some techies go, but I want to sit there with my headphones on. It's like, you know what? The engineer who sits there with their headphones on and doesn't engage with anybody is not actually that valuable. That is not what we're actually looking for. And so that means that if you don't have that learning going on, you're not elevating your junior team members. Your senior people are all meant to have an element where they are leveling up, raising all boats by being there. Nobody's setting up a Zoom meeting to have a 2-minute conversation, about something like as much as they should.
Yeah.
Secondly, it was also, and I realize some people would disagree with this, but there was a social unraveling sort of occurring. And so one of the things that did occur was that after a while of having this in place, I was getting more and more people saying, like, highlighting the positives. The camaraderie's up. I'm building better relationships. I'm feeling better about myself. That would then follow on to situations where
after you return to the office.
Yeah, but just by coming in. My view is that the real resistance is much more like the gym. It's not going to the gym that you don't want to do. As soon as you put your first foot outside the door with your gym bag and you're ready to go, like you've crossed the line there, and nobody then comes back from the gym and goes, God, that sucked. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what I suspected. And what I did see play out was that, and I don't disagree with the folks that kind of went like, I prefer this. And that's one of my arguments that a lot of tech companies are making this move, I think, because senior people who should know better have too much of an incentive to not change it back. Because look, when you're senior and capable and you can put your headphones on and just plane through your work, like, sure, I get it, but that's not the entirety of what you're here for, right? And so I challenge folks to come in more. We did experiment with doing days in the office, like 3 days. But, one of the things, again, this annoys people sometimes when you highlight it, but it's like in New Zealand, if you add up the stat holidays, the sick leave, and the annual leave, you're actually not that far off a 4-day work week, right? You then say, okay, we're going to come in 3 days. And let's say you said Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay. And let's say there's a team of 5 people. All right. Well, annual leave or stat days or sick leave will take them off those days that they may be in. And then if you're familiar with things like the birthday paradox, which kind of says a very small number of people can be brought together, you'll be surprised at how quickly you find 2 people who have the same birthday. It's one of these cryptography arguments, which kind of says it's one of those things humans don't intuit this right. And this is the thing, you can very quickly get with 3 days in the fact that certain colleagues still only see each other like 3 or 4 times in a month, because once you take out those days where they were off on leave and that time that other person was sick and all that, you're like, I think you kind of need to start at 5 and then handle the flexibility of the time. And so I've used the narrative internally with the team that a lot of this is really just about changing the default. This is not about saying, hey, forever we have to be in here every single day. This is about getting back to the default as we come here, and when there is a necessary reason for that to change, we do it. We don't start with, and don't leave the house, and when there's a necessary need, I come in. I'm just trying to shift us back to the pre-COVID default.
Yeah. No, that's
and it's worked so far.
Yeah, it's really, really good to get your view on the reality of how it's worked at Raygun. So and of course you've still got other staff that are in other parts of the world. So they're not able to come into to the office, and you 100%. Still have to deal with those realities of how you work across time zones and
100%
and connect.
Yeah, and some of the other teams outside of engineering are still working on the 3-day sort of week model. I'm sort of wanting to test it through engineering, and given my background in engineering, I'm kind of a bit more over that side of the business at the moment. It's also, honestly, you just see there's people starting to riff off each other's ideas, and start getting something out on the whiteboard, and you're like, this is the magic. This is what, if I could somehow work out how to make that moment go on for, 7.5 hours of every day, like, I would be doing that. Why would you then make decisions that decrease the chances of that occurring? And then if I, cite somebody like Steve Jobs, where if you've read the book Creativity Inc., which was about how literally he designed the offices for Pixar to try to maximize the crossover between teams. And the story kind of goes that he wanted to put the toilets at the other end. So anybody who needed to go to the bathroom would have to walk to the other end of the building. I think they reneged on that because of pregnant women being like, but what we found is the same thing. Is like, we had a situation, I don't think they'd mind me citing it, but like our head of infrastructure ended up having a conversation with our head of marketing over having lunch, where it turned out that the head of infrastructure had the answer to something that the marketing person needed. Now, I can tell you right now, the nature of what that thing was, this would not have come up out of a pure, like, hey, I need this, let me go to the head of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so these are the things, these are all of the hidden costs that sort of occur. And I've heard every excuse under the sun of why this is not a good idea from people who have a reason to support that. And I just come back to people that's like, well, I'm not trying to build a company that is designed to suit every single person on planet Earth. I'm looking for the people who share the same spirit, which turns out, probably about 50 odd people, on Earth. I'm trying to build the best environment for those 50 people to create the products for the hundreds of thousands of people that rely on those products. That's my goal.
Perfect. It sounds like you're doing the right thing.
Well, we'll see. Come back next year and you'll ask me what are my biggest mistakes, so I might be talking about this again. You got to try stuff though. Like, that's the thing.
You do. You've got to experiment.
Yeah, you're a businessman. Same thing. It's like, if you're not trying out ideas, that's actually what I love about business. Is it's like the freedom to, for listeners, before this kicked off, Paul was going through his process software and saying, I start mucking around with the process. I'm like, yeah, you and me, mate. Like, this is the same thing. Like, building, constructing, optimizing. It's what really gets us out of bed.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. We're probably just about out of time, and there was a bunch more that would have been nice to delve into. Any sort of last point? I saw in our notes you had tweeted something about this. Gardening that your team was doing. Have we got time to delve into that before we wrap up?
Yeah, so this is to that point of, we've got to try experiments, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I recognized within our business was that we have been delivering software a little bit slower, every few months than we were a few months earlier. And when I'm coding, I try to, not that I do a lot of it at work, it's mostly fun now. I always say, when I'm doing the CEO stuff, like, I'm sitting there missing the coding. When I'm coding, I'm like, I really should be doing that. So anyway, but I was looking at the speed of our delivery, and I realized, like, it's nothing to do with the capability of the people. Like, at this point, you're approaching a 10-year-old code base. We sell 3 major products, and then, we've talked about the scale. And for those of you that aren't software engineers, usually what happens is the more high performance you need to write the code, the less understandable it becomes. And that's because you're really having to talk much more the language of the computer, because you're trying to align to how the computer works, than writing code that maybe is less efficient but is human understandable. And so there are some complexities that arise in our code base that are fairly unique. And so I've been spending a bit of time thinking about how can we accelerate and improve some stuff here. So I've called it gardening, where we said for 2 months, starting at the beginning of this month and going to 1st of December, we're not going to do any work in the engineering team except for support. So if a customer has an issue, we'll fix it, but largely self-directed as a group. They have these 2 months to tidy up the shop. And so they're doing things like completing our migration to .NET 6. We'll then bump it to 8 later this year. And that's because we've been moving to .NET Core for many years, but we have almost 300 projects as part of the solution.
Okay,
This could go on for another blooming decade, and so it's like, well, let's get that resolved. Let's take all of these things that we all know are an annoyance, or slow us down. So we want to basically get back to being absolutely top of our game around that. And so a few people have sort of pinged me and gone like, wow, that's a really bold move to say, hey, your whole engineering team for 2 months, and sure, if I tot up the costs, it's a pretty high cost. But I'm working on the belief that it's an investment that over the next 12 months will easily repay itself in the increased velocity of our delivery. I've also had a bunch of people saying, what are the metrics? Like, how did you know you're going to do this? And I was like, well, it's not going to be a very comforting answer, but at this point, I've got 30 years of building software experience. It's like, I know problems when I see them. I know what the outcome is going to be. I don't need somebody to come and give me a report on why they should do this. And what's been really cool, though, is it's also, in my view, it's really upping the ownership of the code base to the team. Now, obviously, they're the only people working on it anyway, but this gives the opportunity to say, no, we really do own this. And if we're not able to sort of ship as quickly as we'd like, now keep in mind, we still deploy to prod 5 to 10 times a day. We'll go faster, but that sense that, finally we can go and do this stuff we've wanted to do. And we have this great guy at work. He actually is the owner of the System Improvements Register. Every little problem that he wishes we could kind of buff out. And I've said, look, we're not going to get to everything in 2 months, but if we can get a few of these large bolters out of the way and smooth down, we're going to go quicker. And so that's just been awesome to see. And I'll report back on LinkedIn with how we actually go. We have got some measures, so I should be able to report some hard numbers at the end to say, hey, this was the pre-state, this was the post-state. But yeah, I'm just really excited to see how it goes. Plus side is I'm up here in Auckland for the day, so I was like, let's see what's happened today. I always get excited going back and having a look. It's quite funny. We have a guy in Taiwan, so he joined, and about 6 months in, I made this comment on a pull request, and he's like, "Wait, you go and check my pull requests?" And I was like, well, yeah, but not from a critical eye of trying to judge you. I literally just like it in the evening, go and have a look at what's the code that we shipped today and what did we do. And I love that. So like I say, I live at the intersection of business and engineering, and I love both immensely. And I just can't imagine not doing that. So I just, overall really enjoy everything we're doing.
That's great. Well, a real pleasure to have you on the New Zealand Tech Podcast, JD. So thanks for coming in. Anything else you want to mention? Maybe if you're doing any hiring or anything else that might be relevant to our audience before we wrap up.
Yep. So we are at the moment just doing that intern hiring stuff at the moment. So if you might technically be a bit late today, but if you are an intern looking for a summer type of gig, if you're a student, particularly if you're really into hardcore performance engineering, by all means reach out around that. At the moment, most of any sort of additional hiring is probably overseas at this point. And just hit me up on Twitter. I love to chat with like-minded people. I really want to see us grow this country and build more great products and businesses here. So anybody wants to talk about that, I'm here to talk about it.
Right on. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks again for joining us. And of course, thank you to our show partners, Gorilla Technology, HP Spark 2 Degrees, and 1NZ for their support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and of course the broader sort of tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. If you've been listening or watching our one of our live streams, then do make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast on whatever channel that you listen to audio on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatnot. And of course, if you're listening to the audio, do look out for us on wherever you watch video. We do tend to live stream most Tuesday afternoons. We are on YouTube, X, Facebook, and probably actually the biggest audience at times will be on LinkedIn. To get the LinkedIn feed, just follow myself, Paul Spain. So thanks, everyone. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, JD. Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, Brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.